Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Isaac Square Tables, our beloved webinars every Wednesday. Today, I'm going to be your host and moderator. My name is Ramzi Masri, so if you need anything, please feel free to ping me over the text. And during today's presentation, we will be taking questions mainly through the text. In a few seconds, I will be showing how. Izaka Square Tables is organized by Izaka Netherlands chapter and sponsored by Noria, the Dutch IT Authors Institute. Today's Square Table is with the title CMMI Ecosystem Overview, Building Capability and Continuously Improving Organizational Performance. Before we start, I would like to ask everyone to mute your microphone and stop sharing your video camera as soon as you enter the session. These are like our housekeeping rules to make sure that we can have an enjoyable webinar experience. Also, please make sure that the same first name, last name that you used during the registration are the ones shown on the Microsoft Teams. This helps us to provide you with your CPs. This presentation indeed will be recorded and along with the slides, and it will be released afterwards on our YouTube channel. If you need to have any questions during the presentation, please use the raise hand feature. If you're not like very well aware where it is, that's exactly where it is, just next to the other, let's say, participants and chat icons. And just raise hand, and as a moderator, I'll try to help and see the best moment where we can interrupt the speaker and help you ask your question, whether by repeating the question if you type it over the chat or asking you to unmute and ask a question directly. Before we start today's excellent presentation and let's say introducing the speaker, we do have a quick announcement. As of last year, we had a great risk event, 16th of November 2022. It had around 8 keynote speakers and 24 breakout sessions. This year, we're coming back with a new and I could say continued successful event. The risk event for 2023 still on 16th of November, still in the same place, Spant in the lovely city of Bussum. We already have 300 registrations to take care. There are limited seats. Please, if you're interested, go ahead and register as quick as possible. Program is online. We do have this year a very interesting topic. Last year, we were talking about emerging risks and risks from the war and risks from new technologies. And this year, we are continuing. It's the year of the AI, if we can call it that way, or AI advancement, artificial intelligence. And we chose a nice title, Hey ChatGPT, Can I Trust You? We do have 4 different breakout streams. I'm interested that you go to the website on the unmelded.nl risk event slash risk event 2023. Check it out. It is really going to be a very interesting and informative and educative event. So, and of course, CPEs are there, but the CPEs are not the most important thing. The most important thing is you will get really exclusive content over there. So I would recommend that you go ahead and register for the risk event. Without further ado, today our speaker is Ron Lear. He's the Vice President for Frameworks and Models. So Ron has a huge experience with building the capability and continually improving performance, product development, engineering, service operations, cybersecurity, supply chain, and data quality management. He's a former chief architect and led his team currently managing the Izaka frameworks. So the launch of CMMI version 2.0 was part of Ron Lear's, let's say, as a chief architect, and now we're coming to CMMI 3.0. And without further ado, I would like to switch to Ron. So Ron, you can take over the sharing, screen sharing.
Thank you, Ramzi. Appreciate it. Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Hope you can all hear me okay. So as Ramzi said, I would prefer this to be interactive. So Ramzi's going to keep an eye out on chat, on the chat. So if you do have questions, please raise your hand and we'll stop and take questions as we go. And there will be plenty of time at the end as well to kind of go through. So I'll walk you through these slides again. If you get any point in time where you have questions, please do raise your hand. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we're doing with the ecosystem, and how you can leverage CMMI in your organizations as consultants, as ISACA members, and so forth. All right, so why is CMMI even around? So there was a study McKinsey did a while ago, and basically this is the same definition we use in CMMI around the term capability. It's anything an organization that they need to do well to drive meaningful business results. Every organization has capabilities, but many don't have process to actually measure that capability against best practices and pinpoint which ones are driving higher performance. And you can see some of the McKinsey results here. 50% don't have standard processes, and that could be automated processes, it could be documented processes, etc. Planning, building organizational capability, no real way of measuring what matters or monitoring things. So this is a need new organizations and existing organizations all have, is to make sure that their capability is matching what their business needs are. And that's where CMMI comes into play. So right now, the CMMI is a set of global best practices. We've organized it into 29 different practice areas. These are all common groups of practices that share a common kind of approach or capability. This enables organizations to use the model to not only build their capabilities, but to then benchmark them to see where they are against industry best practice. And this addresses organizations who want to improve. We do this through a channel partner business model. So there are about 450 to 60 licensed ISACA partners around the world who actually are licensed to deliver CMMI appraisal, training, and other services. And we have people who are external consultants to do this. There's individuals. And why this is important, a lot of organizations, the United States, and this is where it started, had some mandates in our acquisitions at the U.S. federal government and Department of Defense that they put in place to make sure that organizations were addressing some of their key needs, which is why the whole maturity level approach kind of came into being. And I've got a slide on this in just a second on the timeline. So why do organizations use CMMI? Well, one, it's a set of best practices. It's got proven results. And it gives the ability to benchmark and compare one organization to another. The model, however, is not a how to do something. It talks about what you need to do, and then it gives examples, example work products, example activities, implementation guide on how, and it lets you as a business choose what's most important for your business. So it's not a one size fits all. It's a customizable approach to any organization. But given how we've done maturity levels, then it gives us the ability to do standardized performance benchmarking and measuring these capabilities across multiple organizations. As one example, the top 20 large system integrators for the U.S. federal government currently have over 100 sites and programs across the U.S., North America, and they're already using CMMI for themselves, for their suppliers, to address some of these capabilities that you see here: better customer satisfaction, getting repeat business, increased profitability, increased quality, less rework, better schedule performance, better cost performance, decreased risks. So the CMMI is helping organizations address all of these. And one of the things that I'll say is kind of the secret sauce to CMMI is it can actually move the needle or change and improve multiple of these capabilities and these goals across an organization. So that's one of the things that's kind of unique about CMMI. So we have made the shift for CMMI with version 3.0. In its origins, CMMI was built around software development. So the original software CMM, or capability maturity model, as it was called then, was built by the Carnegie Mellon University Software Engineering Institute as a way, through their federally funded Research and Development Center, or FFRDC, contract with the federal government and the Department of Defense, to put in a set of best practices to help measure and improve how software development was working, or in this case, wasn't working very well for the DoD. CMMI has expanded greatly since those early days. We now have not only product engineering and development, but we also have service delivery and operations, security, safety, data management, supply chain and resilience, workforce management, including best practices around virtual and hybrid workforce. So the model covers 8 primary domains now, and it has a whole bunch of core information that goes with that. I'm going to show you that in just a few minutes. This is a globally accepted standard. We're in multiple countries around the world in multiple language. And one of the big attractions and usefulnesses of CMMI is it gives you a very clear, prioritized evolutionary pathway to build your current or improve your current and build new capabilities, but that are actually giving you measurable business results. And that's a kind of a fundamental shift we made with 2.0 when we launched it back in 2018. I'll go into that more in just a minute. This is just a quick timeline of the history of the CMMI. I'm not going to read all this to you. You'll have the slides after today's presentation. I mentioned the Department of Defense set this up back starting in 1987, and the software capability model was released in 91, and it went through several iterations, including in 2010, there was the need to expand beyond software to look at systems engineering, hardware engineering, but also services, acquisition, people. And so the the software CMM became the CMMI, which included multiple frameworks and multiple approaches. It was built on the software CMM, but also heavily built on the United States Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA's. They had a similar maturity model, but it was based on continuous approach versus a staged approach. And so we merged them together to allow organizations to take both approaches if they needed to. Then Carnegie Mellon spun off to the CMMI Institute 2013 and to basically privatize CMMI and to move it from the institute nonprofit perspective and really get it out there in industry, regardless of size, verticals, etc. So in 2016, the CMMI Institute was acquired by ISACA, and ISACA held it as a wholly owned subsidiary for several years. And then in 2018, 2019, what was the remainder of the CMMI Institute team was fully integrated into the rest of ISACA. During that time in 2018, as I mentioned earlier, we launched version 2.0. The last version prior to 2.0 was version 1.3, and it had languished out there for about 8 years and was silent on some new technologies such as agile software development, DevSecOps, and other key best practices that we knew that the model needed to have included. So 2.0 was a major overhaul. We had 300 people from industry all over the world, over 40 organizations, several of whom pitched in their own money to help develop this new version of the CMMI. That was over a 2 or 3 year cycle from 2016 through 2018. And then shortly after we launched 2.0, we also launched our medical device discovery appraisal program, which is based on CMMI 2.0 and now 3.0, to address medical device industry findings that the Medical Device Innovation Consortium, or MDIC, and the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, had as terms of addressing some of their approaches to doing continuous improvement in the medical device industry. We started accepting version 2.0 appraisals in 2019. We continue to make product updates since then. We released safety and security back in 2021. Those were the top 2 additional new content requirements and demand we had from industry. We rebranded CMMI to CMMI Performance Solutions because it is really kind of a whole ecosystem versus just the model. And then in 2023, in April of this year, we released version 3.0, which includes the former People CMM model, but also the Data Management Maturity model, and all the great content that was in those 2 models, but also added a lot of new content for those 2 aspects. We also added DevSecOps context-specific information. We did major updates on Agile, and pretty much the entire model all the way around. So let's go through a little bit of the landscape on who uses CMMI in the world. Right now, we're looking at over 10,000 organizations. There are 12 national governments that we're aware of who have some sort of contractual or other requirement built around CMMI. U.S. government, Department of Defense is one example. India's infrastructure around finance has some requirements, for example, for the People CMM. So all of those governments have been leveraging, and we're in discussions now with multiple other governments about how they could leverage CMMI in their approaches. We're in 106 countries, 10 languages. Like I said, this number 424 is now closer to 460. And in 2022, we cleared over 4,500 appraisals globally. So think about it as 4,570 different organizations who have used CMMI to appraise and benchmark what their current capability is against the CMMI. And those numbers have increased every year since we launched 2.0. 2022 was a record year in terms of number of appraisals as just one adoption metric. Who else? So these are just, this logo field is just to give you some general ideas of some of the companies who have been using CMMI for a long time. And we have some organizations that are using it. For example, the GAO you see over here in the lower right, that's the General Accounting Office with the U.S. government. They go out and do audits of government contracts and government contractors and their agencies. And they look at best practices to make sure they're adhering to government regulatory requirements and so forth. And they have CMMI version 2.0. They have an enterprise license for that they use when they have findings for their audits that they point the organization getting audited to say, here's how you can solve your audit gaps. So CMMI is used one way for that. I have a couple more slides. I'll talk about the FDA MDAT program here, but you can just see we work in every branch of the U.S. military. We work in some branches of other international defense systems and so forth. So CMMI's got a footprint pretty much worldwide at this point. So which industries then are using CMMI? Information technology being number one at 78% here. But you can see there's a lot of other organizations beyond what I would call a traditional user of CMMI, which would be like a government agency or government contracting organization. And we've seen the switch from government agencies, government contractors, over to more commercial organizations using it. So you can see now defense is actually only 1.1% of the top industries here. Professional activities, manufacturing is used heavily, financial services, energy, oil, gas, transportation. And you can see, again, top 10 list about where CMMI is being used across the board. So in the past, there's been a little bit of a misperception that the CMMI is only for government contractors and typically only for the big government contractors. And my next slide will debunk that myth as well. From all of the appraisals, those 4,500 from last year and over the 10,000 we've done since we've launched in 2018 and 2019, one of the key things is most of the organizations, 88% in fact, were organizations with less than 100 people. So there were medium to small organizations. Typically, they were small startup companies. Sometimes they'd been around for a while. They were going after certain contracts and so forth, and they were trying to build their capabilities. So you can see here, 0 to 50, that's the biggest majority. So small companies with less than 50 FTPEs, when you add in up to 100, you're getting to that 88%. But it's still being widely adopted as well by large system integrators and large organizations. So you can see this is kind of a reverse bell curve here in terms of adoption. But it also debunks the myth that CMMI is only for large organizations and it's only affordable for large organizations. What these numbers are showing is quite the opposite. Small organizations can very much benefit from using CMMI. So what are the primary roles in our ecosystem? I'm going to start from the left to the right here, and I'm not reading all these words to you here, just kind of talking about it in general. But where the ecosystem starts is on the left. This is basically the people who are buying services or capabilities from a contracting organization that they want to make sure that they're getting what they're paying for with good quality, et cetera. So that might be, for example, a contracting agency like the Department of Defense, or it could be a large organization like the Boeing Company or Northrop Grumman or Siemens or any of those kinds of companies. And they're buying products and services from their suppliers, and they want to know that they're actually following good best practices. So that's where the ecosystem funding really starts, and it funds the entire ecosystem from there. From there, you get organizations. These are the people who are actually adopting CMMI. So they're providing products or services to the buyer, the one on the right, the sponsor is providing services or products to the buyer, and they're using CMMI to demonstrate to that buyer that they're actually meeting industry best practices. So from there, you move into the sponsor's delegate. They might have someone who's they've basically assigned to do the work of implementing and adopting CMMI. Those people typically work with the CMMI consultant and partners on the far right here, which are basically the people guiding them how to actually go about adopting CMMI. So in here, you see we have the CMMI lead appraiser. These are people who are sponsored by CMMI partners. So they're ISACA partnered agreement, licensed agreement with ISACA to deliver appraisal services, to be on the appraisal team as appraisal team members, and to do training with ISACA courses and so forth. So that information, those are the three types of roles that partners typically play in the ecosystem. And then those partners are the ones, they're the service provider, and they're providing this ISACA-based IP to companies to use CMMI and appraisals, et cetera. A lot of these are small businesses, but some are large businesses that have partner agreements with us, like Northrop Grumman, the Boeing Company, et cetera. They all have, the United States Air Force, all have enterprise licenses with us and so forth. And then for some aspect of our appraisals, particularly in China, we have registered interpreters to also help with the adoption there, so that people actually have someone who can speak Mandarin, simplified Chinese, to be able to actually understand the fairly technical aspects of CMMI. So now I want to talk a little bit about the shift. Before I go, Ramsey, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do have one. That's why I wanted to wait till now so I can interrupt you. We have a question from Dick Venema. Is CMMI going to let you pass the CMMC requirement of DoD?
That is an excellent question. I've got a quote on that, so I will show you that in a few minutes. We have done a crosswalk between the CMMI and the CMMC. So that's the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Program that the Department of Defense has outsourced to a nonprofit association called the Cyber AB. And the DoD has a requirement to protect federal contract information and controlled unclassified information through this CMMC program. However, CMMC has been having challenges getting off the ground. Anyone who's looked at the CMMC model, it will look very familiar to you if you know the CMMI, because basically they completely copied our approach for maturity levels, certifications, etc. And what we have done in that crosswalk that I mentioned is found out that basically CMMI addresses about 85 to 90% of what the CMMC requirements are. The only pieces it does not require are the specific controls themselves, which are contained in NIST 800-171. That's part of the challenge that the CMMC team is meeting right now, because many of you may be aware, NIST 800-171 is going through a revision as we speak, and Rev 3 is about to be released, which is what CMMC is based on. So there's a couple of moving parts there. Short answer to that question is yes, you can, and there are organizations who are already leveraging CMMI to address their CMMC requirements. There was also a federal contract adjudication that went through earlier this year in a United States Air Force program. And a bidder was putting in that their CMMI approach was going to be how they were going to address CMMC. and they were thrown out of the bid as being non-responsive, but the procurement judge overturned that ruling and said, no, the CMMI can be used to address CMMC requirements. So we're starting to see a lot of great traction there. One of the things we're considering, and I would love for you all to give me direct feedback at the end of my slides, you'll see my email. I'd like to know, would your customers who are considering and having to deal with CMMC be interested in let me use CMMI to address CMMC requirements, adoption guide or a handbook of some sort. That's something we're considering, to take that crosswalk to give people basically the recipe for how do you use CMMI to meet CMMC. Great question.
Yep. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move on now and talk a little bit about the shift that we have done. So this diagram shows you the entire set of product suite components within the performance solution of CMMI. So you talk about the entire ecosystem with this term CMMI performance solution, but there are 5 major components in the ecosystem. First and foremost is the model itself. It's the framework of best practices. There are built-in value statements for practice areas. We greatly simplified it. We had plain language and readability and grade level targets that we used when we put 2.0 in place. To give you an example, CMMI 1.3, the previous version, was actually written at a double PhD level, which explains why a lot of people had challenges understanding it and adopting it. We have since completely changed that. We're now down at a basic college level, and we're continuing to try and improve that to make it an even lower. And for those of you who are familiar, there are 2 measurements you use for this kind of thing called Fleisch-Kincaid. One is readability. Readability, the higher the number is better. And the other one is grade level. The grade level, the number there, the lower the better. So those were 2 things we used to measure how we were going to actually make the model more, I'll say, accessible to people and understandable. We also, and each of these components in the past were developed by completely separate and siloed teams. So you had one team working the model, one team working the appraisal method, one team working training and certifications, one team working systems and tools. And at the time, there was no formal official adoption guidance provided by either the Software Engineering Institute or the CMMI Institute after that. This is something we added new as part of 2.0 when we launched it in 2018. So you'll see the graphic on the left, which we lovingly refer to as the rainbow donut. It shows you that all of these things are now done in an integrated fashion. We work the model, the method, the training, the systems, and the adoption guide all together. We still do staggered releases, but the release happens over a 6 to 9 month period. So you typically will put the model out there first. So that's why we launched 3.0 in April. And our plan is in Q1 of 2024, we'll start accepting appraisals because organizations need time to understand the new content, update their processes based on that, and then show that they've actually got sustainability, habit, and persistence in those processes. It becomes the way they normally do work going forward. So we always have that built-in sort of phase timing. But we have a very robust appraisal method, and it includes a new artifact in the appraisal arsenal, which is what we're calling our performance report. It's a standard Excel-based template, and it basically corroborates their maturity levels with their performance levels. I'm going to show you some more slides on what I mean by that. We also completely overhauled the appraisal method to increase reliability and reduce cost, including the introduction of a new appraisal approach called a sustainment appraisal, which doesn't require the same level of detail, rigor, and cost that a full benchmark appraisal would have. So we have 4 types of appraisals in CMMI. Benchmark is where you get your maturity level or capability level rating. Sustainment is a lighter touch, but it is a type of benchmark appraisal, basically. Then we have what we call evaluation appraisals, and our medical device program uses that. There's no rating per se. There are metrics that the FDA is keeping, and it's a highly flexible, tailored approach. And then the last one is what we called an action plan reappraisal, where if a benchmark or a sustainment appraisal barely misses its target, you can go back and do essentially a differential appraisal to meet the and address whatever gaps you might have. So these are all now the new components. It's the same components we have currently with 3.0, and I'm just going to go through and touch on each of them briefly. So 3.0 came about because we were getting very consistent feedback from sponsors. So that goes back to that second role I talked about. These are the end-use organizations adopting CMMI, but also from our partners, from organizations. They wanted a more flexible approach for CMMI to fit their business and say, well, Ron, we have software development, but we also have CMMC requirements. So how can you help us with security? How can you help us with data management? Well, 3.0 will address that. I'm looking at making sure that, for example, I have, because my contract's requiring more resilience of my supply chain. So how do I know my suppliers are actually delivering high quality things? They're doing security by design. I'm flowing down these requirements like the software bill of materials that talks about, are there open source pieces of code in here that could present a particular vulnerability in my code that I incorporate into my end product. All of these things were basically showing where industry was going, and we needed to make sure that CMMI stayed aligned with those current changes. Multi-model appraisals in the CMMI has grown 2,000% since we launched 2.0. Right now, more than half, well, about half of our lead appraisers and partners have more than three or more domains that they currently have. Development services being the two most common one, but supplier management is also in there, and now we have security and safety, and then we've added 3 new domains. So this also gives us a step forward with being able to integrate with other frameworks. So the question we had earlier about, does CMMI work with CMMC? And the answer is yes, because we've updated CMMI to be able to do that. We also have it so that it works with our digital trust ecosystem framework. I helped create some of that as well in terms of the overall architecture and so forth. And my team's primary role within ISACA is to work on integrating all of our frameworks, but also making sure our frameworks will integrate very well and smoothly with other frameworks like MDAP, like NIST, like ISO and CMMC. So we have multiple sets of, we do research, checking on demand. What do you want to see next in the model? What's missing in the model? That's kind of done on both a continuous basis, but we do it annually. We do it at our partner workshop. So we're constantly doing market research to find out, where does CMMI need to go next? One of the key things we're hearing right now is around advanced manufacturing. So using technologies like AI, machine learning, robotic process automation. There are organizations already using CMMI to help address those kinds of things. And it's interesting because when you talk about the very high end of manufacturing, like what I just described, using those types of techniques, there's still a fundamental core basis that you need to have put in place to make sure that those work properly. So, for example, data quality is paramount in machine learning, AI, and robotic process automation. You hand off an error, the error gets propagated much faster into the manufacturing line, as an example. So CMMI really helps build a lot of that infrastructure around it, and that's one of the other reasons we're kind of keeping attention. So this shows you the entire model now in a nutshell. On the right are what I was just referring to. It's the core set of best practices that pretty much most organizations need to do if they're just doing basic things like development, safety, security, data management, etc. So you can see this list. We have everything from causal analysis and resolution, configuration management, risk and opportunity management down here at the bottom. We have process management, process asset development, estimating, planning, monitor and control. And then we have these two in the middle, governance and implementation infrastructure, which are there to make sure that what you do in your processes actually sticks around and it changes how, and it shows how the organization is continuously improving. And then what you do as an organization adopting CMMI, you take your core stuff and you add whatever domain. It could be 1, 2, or all 8. It's your choice to be able to address what makes most important sense to your business. So let me show you an example. On the right here, we've got 8 domains, and I want to figure out, how I'm going to do maturity level 2 for CMMI security. Well, my example down here says that I have to get all the core practice areas for practice groups level 1 and 2. And these are the levels here. These are defined the same way across all practice areas and all capability levels and all maturity levels. It's the same algorithm. So level 1, it's unpredictable, reactive. Work can get completed, but it's usually delayed, over budget, etc. Level 2 is where things are starting to get more controlled. You have projects are planning, they're performing, they're measuring, and there's basic things in place. Level 3, you have organizational-wide standards that provide guidance on how projects, programs, product lines, etc., are supposed to work together. It's more consistent than it is inconsistent, and it moves from this sort of reactive state at level 2 to a more proactive state at level 3. When you get to levels 4 and 5, you're now basing all your decision making, all your process change, your continuous improvement, your performance improvement, all based on statistical and quantitative understanding of how work is performed. So at level 4, you can start building baselines and predictive models to say, if I make this change in my process, I know this is what the results, because I can look at the statistics to tell me, I know what the confidence interval is, I know what the probabilities are, and I know if I make that change, it's likely going to really help me out and make a big improvement in what I do. So organizations target what they want from these levels, and then you mix them together to get whatever the domain is that you're looking for. So if you want to do CMMI for development, maturity level 3, which is our current most common appraised type, you would need to look at the core practice areas, including practice groups 1, 2, and 3, all those practices. But then you would add the development practice areas and all their practice groups 1, 2, and 3. So going back here, that would be these 2 practice areas, product integration and technical solution, along with all of these core practice areas up to including level 3 here. So across the board, you can see that's where that is. And the nice thing, I'll say the flexibility about the architecture of this approach is any industry, any organization can determine what maturity level it wants to assess itself against. If you want to look at just security, you can do that. If you want to look at just safety, you can do that. If you want to look at a combination. So the clients that I've been working with on the CMMC question that we had earlier, the recommendation is if you're a services shop, you use services. If you're a product development shop, you use that. But otherwise, you couple security and data management with it, and you have your solution for CMMC. So that's kind of just one example. You can see you can pick and match any of these other 8 domains as you go forward. All right, so just to give you a lot of little other things, just sort of highlighting some of the stuff that we've done. We completely overhauled the Agile with Scrum guidance we had in the previous version in 2.0. Got a lot of feedback from users that, Agile with Scrum was sort of too specific. They wanted more of I'll say a generic approach to overall Agile methodology and development. So we made fairly significant changes across the board. But while we were doing that, we also added DevSecOps. And then we've added within each of the core practice areas, but also a lot of the domain practice areas, context-specific information that talks about, if I'm doing, for example, estimating, how do I factor in my DevSecOps activities into my estimating process? How do I factor that into my planning process and my monitor control process? Or if I'm doing data, how do I make sure that my process quality folks are looking at data as well as process? So we have all of these breadcrumbs or tags now throughout the model that can give you these context-specific information. That can all be found here in the model viewer. I've included a link for you. I'm not going to show it to you right now. If we have questions, I can certainly bring it up, but I'm cognizant of where we are on time, and I want to get through the rest of my slides here and then check. Ramsey, no more questions, it looks like, so I'm going to keep moving along. This is just a quick summary of the appraisal process. 4 phases. Planning and conducting has 3 steps. Phase 2 is where you actually do the appraisal. It used to be on site. But when COVID hit, we made a fundamental shift, and now 99% of all appraisals are being done virtually, and we had to basically revamp the entire appraisal method around that to make sure that we put stuff in place. At the same time, we created this new virtual domain and a new practice area called Enabling Virtual Work, which contains best practices for a hybrid or virtual workforce. And we basically use that on the CMMI appraisal process to develop what the best practices would be for virtual delivered appraisals. So that's just some other information. You can find out a whole bunch of other stuff. You can do searches in the online model viewer. So we did move the model. That was the other thing with 2.0 to an online experience. It's basically web browser based. You can do searches. It's built on a SQL database where all the content of the model is literally a living database. And the entire rest of the model in terms of overview, appendices, and so forth can be found there. If we have time, I'll give you a quick show on that. I mentioned that the adoption process didn't exist in previous versions. It now does. There's a couple of guides I'd point you to here. You can go to these links. The primary one is the CMMI adoption guide. It follows these 6 steps, very similar to Plan, Do, Check, Act. We just add the learn part here and the establish part in terms of objectives. So learn about how the CMMI can work for your organization, set your improvement targets, do an assessment on where you are, create an action plan based on the assessment results, deploy your improvements, remeasure and assess your capability, and then this just continues as an endless cycle of improvement after that. So very quickly, how does CMMI compare competitively? This is just a Harvey Ball analysis against some of the more common frameworks that we see. ISO, I am a member of the U.S. Technical Advisory Group for ISO 9000, TS 176. But we also have several ISACA folks, and we're in liaison states and so forth with several other standards for ISO, including like 20,000, 27,001, 1345 for medical devices and others. The challenge, as you can see, is all those standards are done separately. When I was working heavily with ISO 9000 update to 2015, we were looking at the Annex SL, which was supposed to help align all the other ISO standards, and those are still being realigned to that. So they're not easily integrated necessarily, and they're heavily compliance focused, right? They go in and say, are you doing this or not? Or do you have major or minor findings? And then you get audited based on that. CMMI goes a step further to focus on not just the compliance piece, but the performance piece to say, are you actually getting the results from being compliant, or are you just checking a box? And you can see some of the other things here we looked at Agile, where Agile didn't address some key aspects of things like managing services or managing suppliers. Scaled Agile framework was the other one we just went through. And as you can see here, basically, CMMI really addresses all of these things completely, which is why it's easier to adopt to other standards and models, because we're more comprehensive and we've got the architectural elements to plug and play. So I'm going to give you the last quick highlights here, and then we'll go into some more Q&A. Ramsey, we got a question.
Before we proceed, we have a question, yeah. So again, the Venom is asking, is an appraisal a temporary waiver from an auditor until you have the control correctly in place and ensure that it's a control process for a certain period of time or not? That's his question.
Yeah, so that was about 3 questions in there. So let me see if I can address them. Item 1 is yes. The CMMI, similar to like COBIT and other, we'll look at some of the controls that need to be in place for the appraisal. The CMMI is based on objective evidence, as we call it, that would be outcomes from following a process. So they might be the process itself. It could be a plan. It could be minutes. It could be a system that has embedded processes in it. All those things are open. But until the appraisal team goes in and looks at that and verifies that it's actually meeting the intent and value of the CMMI practice, they would not be considered to be compliant. So that team goes through that and then goes through a very clear set of algorithms to then consolidate and roll up across multiple projects, across multiple domains, how the maturity levels and so forth are determined. And then at the end, the third question you had in there was around the controls. So we look at controls in two ways in CMMI, really three, but the primary one is controls themselves as they're documented, codified in a system, et cetera, right? Those are typically covered in plans or typically covered by processes and so forth. We also look at affirmations in the appraisals. So from those appraisal perspective, it goes through that kind of thing. Ramsey, I have to take a call. I'm sorry, this looks like an emergency. Can we see if there's other questions? I will be right back.
No, that's okay. We don't have other questions, but go ahead then.
I'll be right back. Thank you.
No worries. So for our audience tonight, it seems the speaker got an emergency call, so he will be right back. But for the moment, if you have any more questions, please feel free to ping them over the chat. And specifically for the thank you for the last couple of questions. I want to make sure that we answered, or to be more accurate, Ron answered them quite clearly. So if you can provide some feedback via the chat, if the answers is what you're looking for, or you still have further questions, that would be really great.
Thank you for your patience. Sorry about that. I thought my phone was on Do Not Disturb, but I did get a call from my daughter and I needed to answer it. So thank you all for your patience with me. Any
No
more
worries,
questions,
family
Ramsey?
always. No, not really, but family comes first. So that's good that you had to catch that call. No, we can go ahead.
All right. So moving on then. So what kind of results do people see? So this is our big aha slide from, I mentioned earlier that one of the new requirements in the appraisal process, and this goes back to the last question we had too. In addition to getting appraised and verifying through affirmations from the people doing the work, this is how I do my job following process X, etc. We also look at the objective evidence, which can include various controls like IT controls, security controls, risks, etc. And then there is a performance report that is required to be completed, and it tells what business objectives do you have set for yourself and how are you meeting them? If you want to, for example, reduce your defect rate by 20%, how are you doing against that objective? This slide is showing you that across these categories on your right, so cost management, customer satisfaction, functionality, finance, process productivity, quality, schedule, and staff development, you're seeing a very high correlation and consistent correlation from organizations being able to achieve anywhere, for example, cost management, 20 to 60% achievement in that performance. So they've been able to make those kind of changes consistent across, this is across all appraised organizations that we've had since we launched in 2019. So it's very, very telling information. The link for this is found in our technical performance report. I'll have a link for that in the slides that we send you. Ramsey, do we have another question?
Actually, the question is coming from me personally. So I see across the board, we have really high level of enhancement. As you said,
Yes.
cost between 20 and 60. I just got surprised that the customer satisfaction, which in my head at least should always be better once you enhance your processes, is one of the, let's say, smaller when it comes to the maximum percentage. Or maybe I'm reading the slide wrong. So
no,
I want to ask about this one.
So we could geek out on this question all day long, but you're dead on right. That's the one that we're looking at closely because we have the same assumption that you did, which is, well, if you're improving cost management, schedule performance, quality, why isn't customer satisfaction at a higher level? And what we're seeing is some of this is a lagging indicator, right? So you initially get the cost results, but then the government or whoever your customer is, they may have lag time between, well, okay, I'm not going to actually give you a higher rating until I see this is now how you normally do things. So there is a little bit of a lag there. But the other one I'll tell you is customer satisfaction is so broadly defined by so many different organizations that the numbers here, when you really dig down into them, you could blow them out into their own chart because there's different ways, so many different ways to measure it. versus, for example, cost management is cost management. It means I budgeted 100, I got 100, right? It's that kind of basic stuff. So that's what we're seeing, but that's something we're exploring as we get more and more data under our belts to see, and we might do some zeroing in. What's great about this is it gives us the ability to ask those kinds of questions, right? To be able to go in and say, well, what can we do to address that now? What is there something missing in the model or in the approach that people are taking using it that's not addressing that? Or is it really just that lag time? But great question. I wish I had more answer, but it'd be something that if you go look at the technical report and look into some of the lower level information, it starts to become apparent. Well, okay, this is tied to so many. It could, for example, be tied to every one of these other categories, right? And then it's a composite score, and then that's a little bit harder to read. All of that's going on in this block. So great question, Ramsey.
Thank you. We have another 2 questions, if you don't mind us asking them now.
Please.
Okay, we do have from Peter, CMMI has been developed to measure the maturity level of a company. If the company has a result and wants to improve, what will happen next? So that's one question, what will happen next? And then he say, does it mean that the company needs another cycle of development, I guess? Another cycle, he said another cycle, so.
Yeah, so first and foremost, it's a continuous improvement model. Appraisal maturity levels or formal capability levels have a validity period. For benchmark appraisals, it's 3 years. So you get a maturity level 3, let's say, for your organization. You want to maintain it 3 years, you have to be reappraised. You could be reappraised in 2 years using a sustainment appraisal, which is a lower cost, lower effort, and it extends your validity period another 2 years. So those are the 2 paths you have to choose. But as long as you still want the validity rating, you have to maintain that each of those years. In evaluation appraisals, we don't give ratings and there's no time frame at all. And Ramsey, what was the second question? If you could ask that one again.
So he said, does it mean that a company needs another cycle? My feeling is you already answered that because he said the cycle in the 3 years.
Yes, continuous improvement. So one of the practice area things that's also unique about CMMI that I haven't really touched on, but we have this idea about sustaining habit and persistence. And what we mean by that is, how do you know that when you make these improvements, they stick, that they actually are the way that the organization behaves going forward, and they're not just doing it to pass an appraisal? So we have evidence that we look for, practices that are in place that helps verify that. The performance report is also a way to verify that. And from those things together, the assumption is you're going to continue to try to get better, right? You're going to constantly be improving. You might have, okay, this capability, I was really bad at planning. I fixed that. Now I want to go over and figure out how can I make more efficient decisions. I could go focus my attention there. So it gives you that ability to kind of reprioritize once you've done it. And it just becomes this great targeting mechanism. I will say, if you've done it for several years, there is a point of diminishing returns where it's like, you're really kind of squeezed out all the performance you can from the processes, but things always are changing. Organizations change, new technologies are out there. Processes and how people do work don't change, generally speaking. I mean, they change by getting automated and so forth, but people still have to do steps and do outputs and create things using process.
Maybe I'm going to ask, in response to your answer, if you allow me, I have a smaller question. When you said at some point you reach a time of like diminishing returns, so I guess you mean after multiple cycles of improvement, at some point there is no venue for more improvement, right? That's what you meant.
No, let me say it slightly different. So you need to have very precise abilities to measure your processes to get the kind of improvements that you need out of them. That's what level 4 and 5 in CMMI is all about. It gives you I'll call it a way to instrument your process so that you could say, if I change the process X, I get this kind of big result from quality. I increase my quality by 20%, for example. So you get more into that versus just generic improvements and so forth.
Yep, we have one last question from Imran. Is there any research or confirmation that a high level relates to project or program success? I think Ron had to leave the room for a second. Yeah, most probably it's related to the
Sorry about that. I
emergency.
missed that question.
No worries, I'm going to repeat it. So when we also got another question, but first one is from Imran. He's saying, is there any research or confirmation that a high level, high level, let's say, change or maturity change relates to project or program success? That's what he said, that
Yeah,
a high
so
level relates to, yeah.
yeah, that's what this data is starting to show you. Let me go forward. So I'll provide this to you all so you can look at it. This performance report, this is the front cover, has all the details behind that last slide in it to talk about exactly that question. It talks, how do I know that my maturity level means I've got better performing contractors, organizations, and so forth. So lots of great information in here. We also have a bunch of case studies you can look at. And you can see here kind of the key things. We're seeing it's adopting across multiple industries and geographies. The performance results are speaking for themselves. You can see it across the board here. The results, it's not so much every individual number like the discussion we had a little bit ago on customer satisfaction, but overall, all the numbers are positive. They're all like hugely positive, and 88,
Yep.
it went up from 81 to 84%. So of all these organizations that have been appraised, the 10,000, they had something like 38,000 different business objectives that we sorted through. And they fell
Wow.
into those 10 categories, right? So quality, etc. And then from those, they all saw multiple measures that they took. That's all captured in this performance report information. So it's overwhelmingly like, of the targets they set, they hit those targets 84% of the time across
Wow, that's
all
actually good.
industries. And like, what other framework model or anything that you can think of can boast, oh, if I use this 84% of the time, I'm going to get what I'm aiming for? It's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, it is. Imran, I see you sent another question. I think it's a continuation because you say, how would you respond to the critique that CMMIs and its kind are a form of regulatory capture? Only companies who have deep pockets are able to obtain a high enough level to get contracts. But we see from time to time that they, between brackets, large companies, pocket the contracts but deliver peanuts. My feeling that this is a bit of a discussion, Imran, that maybe you can reach out to Ron afterwards, because like some of this requires some background discussion, if you don't mind.
Yeah, and just to touch on that briefly, that is definitely one of the factors we put into our goals for the product suite when we first developed 2.0, which means it's not just for people with deep pockets, and it's not just doing it for peanuts and so forth, right? So that's where this performance results information really comes into play and ties that together. But you can also see from my slide, CMI has been adopted now by companies with less than 50 FTEs. These are people who like have less than $1 million a year annually sometimes, and they have afforded to be able to do this and get the results.
That's actually why I said, like, maybe it's better if he could reach out, because my feeling is that the discussion requires more background information. But please
Yep.
go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. So this is just kind of recapping what I talked about with so what this report does is summarize all of those appraisals that have been going on since we launched, to provide this kind of data. There's a lot more data than this in the report itself. It talks about where the footprints are and so forth. So I would just encourage you all to take a look. There's a further details that talks about the individual companies and industries that this is coming from. So you can see some of we've got it so you can kind of dive down into the data pretty deep. So that's more on that. And then I talked about just very quickly, the medical device company, our program. So this is the U.S. Food and Drug Administration just launched this a while ago. And actually a couple weeks ago announced the final guidance for using this program. It's called the Case for Quality Volunteer Improvement Program. It's based on the CMMI. It was done with a basically consortium, Medical Device Innovation Consortium, industry, and the FDA. Basically took CMMI 2.0, now 3.0, and set it up to be specific for medical device class 1, 2, and 3. Mostly class 1 have been going through it to date. Medical device manufacturers, and being able to use CMMI to address real change and value in the overall ecosystem there. I've got some additional ones here. The earlier question we got about CMMC, I'll point you to this slide. You can see what one organization's already been doing, and basically they're saying CMMI is getting them ready for CMMC, so they're not worried about CMMC. And you can see some great quotes. I've also given you some links to the technical case studies and so forth. So with that, questions, any more questions, Ramsey? We're right at the top of the hour.
We're right at the top of the hour, but if you have a couple of minutes, we have one question coming in. But also, I would like to touch more on the cyber maturity platform from ISACA, if it had any updates after CMMI 3.0. I think we covered a lot, and you mentioned that the 3.0 model already had some updates, but I wanted to know if the platform itself from ISACA had any updates from the 3.0, and then we'll go for the next question.
Okay. CCP, so the CMMI cybersecurity platform, has actually been moved into maintenance mode. There's only one planned update that's going on, which is an update to the ISO 27001 mapping that's currently in there because that standard just got updated. But ISACA is looking at what we need to do with the CCP platform and program, so there's no other updates planned at this time. It's basically we're reevaluating its viability, etc.
Oh, okay. Then I'll move to our last question for the evening. Again, from Dick, he's saying, based on our experience, we have seen that NIST 800-171 is the framework and policies we follow, but CMMC looks at the execution and improvement on the processes, risk mitigation, and controls. Is CMMI the ISO, in between brackets, evidence for the standards like NIST? That's a question mark. Ensuring execution and improvement. It's a combined question about NIST 800-171, CMMC, and is the CMMI like the kind of like evidence for the standards like NIST?
Yeah, so great question. So CMMC is going through, so as I said, CMMC is based predominantly on 800-171, Rev 2 in fact, and specifically. And they're already looking, so we've already got a CMMC 2.0 out there. There's the CMMC appraisal process, which I helped to write. And the program is still going through a bunch of changes. So, for example, they're saying now that level 1 organizations can probably self-assess and report, and that's probably fine for level 1. It's level 3 where the full set of requirements are in play, where it has to be the third party through a. So all those things are changing right now in the CMMC program. But the answer is yes, CMMI could bridge that gap for sure. And I would say, is it the ISO? I'd say I'm not sure I would compare it that much to ISO. But can the approach that's already out there in interest in industry and across a lot of organizations, anyone doing business with the Department of Defense who's going to have a CMMC requirement, their infrastructure is already in place. And the updates being planned for CMMC, and ironically, the NIST 800-171 Rev 3 update includes putting planning and processes back into the standard, which we've said all along needed to be there. So yeah, CMMI has already solved that for you. It's there, and it's taking care of that problem. And I've got several customers I'm talking to with that very thing. Large organizations, small organizations, they all have the same challenge, and CMMI gives them an 85 to 90% solution.
That's really great. Ron, thank you so much for the great presentations, and thank you for talking to us tonight. I would like to, and thank you for sharing your info. So if you need any more questions, please reach out to Ron directly on his email. I would like to thank you all for attending tonight, and wishing you a great evening. and hope to see you in our next ISACA Square Table. And maybe a small reminder about the risk event, 16th of November. I'm going to be your marketeer here and say, reserve your spot. It's really going to be a very, very informative and educative event about artificial intelligence risk and also the cybersecurity risk attached to it. Thank you so much. Have a good evening and see you soon.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Ramsey. Thanks,
Thank
Debbie.
you.